Guys, this week I'm incredibly excited. I've got Ryan Kirby on with me, who is an incredible artist. I stumbled upon his work on Instagram, and he creates these informational graphics and videos based off of art that he has drawn. I was wildly attracted to it. I reached out to him, and turns out he's just a massive deer nerd. And so we're talking this week about the growth and maturity process of whitetails and where deer reach their maximum potential at, how to understand if a deer has reached its potential, and just nerding out on deer stuff. So, guys, I would highly encourage you to not only check out Ryan Kirby art, but tune into this week's episode, as it is wildly informational and very fun as we talk about some very cool stuff. As always, this week's episode is presented by our fantastic friends over at ScentLock, proven deadly with their activated carbon technology for maximum odor absorption. It's absolutely phenomenal. Go check it out.
Welcome to Bear Archery's Hunting 101 podcast, where hunters new and old come to learn and find inspiration from stories of hunts gone by. Everyone is welcome to enjoy the outdoor way of life, and there is no better time to start than right now. So let's head into the great outdoors with your host, Dylan Ray.
All right. Well, I've got Ryan Kirby here on the phone with me today. And I stumbled upon, I love informational type stuff. Like, I love stuff that makes me a better hunter. Like, there's one thing about looking and watching guys, and you're like, man, they go on really cool hunts, and I wish I could be them. And then there's another thing where people are putting out good informational content, and you're like, this is legit. I like this guy because he makes me a better hunter. And I stumbled upon your stuff, and I'm like, man, how is he making this? Like, how is he making these informational videos and graphics? Come to find out, you are making them. You're drawing them or painting them or however it is you're doing it. So before I jump in, give me an introduction to yourself, like how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, man. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm Ryan Kirby, and I'm a wildlife artist, illustrator, designer. That'd probably be the best way to explain myself. My degrees are in graphic design and multimedia, and then I basically have built a business doing fine art, so drawing, painting. I work oil on canvas, sketching, that kind of stuff, and we have some prints. But the ones you're referring to is probably a whole episode, which is why we're here, I guess.
Yes.
But yeah, man, I grew up in a small town, grew up bow hunting, fell in love with it, whitetails and deer, turkey, all that kind of stuff. And then essentially I've formed a career out of my passion and my ability. So it's been a good run so far.
Now, let me just, I'll just do this. First off, guys, like, if you haven't checked out Ryan, what the heck's wrong with you? But so this is what I'm talking about. All of these things are, is this called drawn, or is this painting, or?
Yeah, all those are hand drawn.
Hand stinking drawn. You look at this and you're like, man, that's really cool. And then you realize somebody took the time to draw that, which is a whole nother level of like, holy crap, my mind is blown. But I seriously I started finding this informational type stuff on the growth of deer. And, if you listen to a couple weeks episodes ago, I was talking with Corey from Liberty Ranch, and we were talking about how to manage our property for deer. And so I've been on this kick about mature deer and growing mature deer and what I need to give my deer and how old they need to get, and all this stuff to grow deer. And so I stumbled upon Ryan, and then I'm like, man, I love informational type stuff, but his is way cooler than any I've ever seen. Well, it turns out he's drawing it himself. And so all of these types of things, which I was just blown away by, showed my dad, and he was like, yep, ordering it. I'm doing it now. He's like, that'll be in my office this week. And so just really cool stuff. And so what made you like,
Thanks,
where did you take this I'm an artist, but I'm a hunter, I want the two to collide? Were you just sitting there
Yeah.
one day and you're like, I can paint cool deer?
Well, it's I mean, if you want to go way back, I mean, artists have been telling the story of the hunt for a long time, since cave art,
Yeah.
you know. There's a lot of people that talk about why they depicted art on cave walls. I think they were a lot like us. I think they liked big deer and big elk, and I think they thought it was cool,
Oh
you
yeah.
know. And so the connection between art and wildlife has run really strong, and even today, the market for wildlife art has always remained strong. It's something art has raised a ton of money for conservation. So we were talking about Pope and Young. I got my start at the National Wild Turkey Federation, Ducks Unlimited, Rocky Mountain Elk. Over the years, art has been, wildlife art specifically, has been really tied to the conservation movement. One of my favorite artists, Carl Rungius, he was commissioned, and a lot of those early artists, before photography got to where it is now with digital photography, they were commissioned by the History of Natural Science or the Museum of Natural History and some places like that in New York to go to the wilderness and depict what that looked like and bring it back to the cities to encourage people to go explore and hunt and fish. And you really dive into the history of wildlife art and hunting, and they've really been tied. They've been synonymous for centuries. So that really is the nature of what I do. And what I try to do is contribute to the atmosphere of hunt camp, to bring the outdoors indoors. And it may seem like a difficult stretch for a lot of people, but it's really probably the core of who I've always been. You know, I grew up a farm kid. I've always hunted. I've always fished. I was way more excited about deer hunting and high school football than I ever was art when I was a kid, you know. And then as I got older and got further into my career, the union between hunting and art just has continued to get stronger. But go ahead.
So where did this particular project come from? Like the one
Yeah.
to, and I don't know if you have a name for the whole project. I believe you have a bundle on your
Mhm.
website, which would probably be the name of the project. The Art of Hunting bundle is what it's called.
Yeah.
Where did that idea of that informational stuff come from?
Well, it was 4 years ago is when I actually did that piece. And I have a company that represents me in licensing, like home decor. And what they
Right.
do is they manufacture products for the home. They approached me and wanted to license some of my art for that stuff. And you can see a lot of that at Tractor Supply. That's our lineup at Tractor Supply. And I was going down to High Point, North Carolina at a big show there to meet with them, and really just walking around. And it's funny, it's not a wildlife show at all. Like, I got off the bus to go into this show, and there's a bunch of Chinese dudes in suits that are there to buy like fabric. I mean, it is crazy.
Yeah.
Everybody there is either an interior designer or a wholesale furniture home decor producer. Um, I really did not fit in all that well at all, because it's a bunch of people that look like they from HGTV is basically all it is, the whole show. But you get to walk around and see what's cool in home decor, what kind of trends are out there, you know, what's going to hit the market next year in Target or Home Goods or wherever. And I saw it was like a shadow box, and it had the different species of butterflies. And it was one of those things. It was kind of generic, like you'd see it in a hotel. But I thought, man, what could I do with wildlife that could be kind of cool? And so I thought, well, the species of ducks, of waterfowl, ducks and geese and swans and everything. So I had this idea to produce a print of the waterfowl of North America species and then divvy them up by the flyways. And we've got a series of those too. And so that was the first part of this whole project. So I came back, and I had a kid that was working for me. He had just graduated with his MBA, and we started kind of thinking about how we could do this as a project, as a print. He was running the numbers on everything. We were finding vendors to print it. And what I did is I sat down and I spent about a month and a half sketching duck heads. So there's 44 waterfowl species. I would go do design work and hit all my deadlines in the morning, and then I'd sketch about 3 to 4 waterfowl species a day. And so it took me a little over a month to do all that. And then I hired a designer. My degree is in graphic design, but I really liked I liked his style, liked the way that he worked. He had some really cool other projects. And I thought, hey man, I'm going to see if he'll be interested in designing this for me. So while I'm sketching, he's laying the thing out. And Cameron was where a lot of the sort of vintage vibe to it, the kind of vintage, like a rough, old, faded paper texture, some of the fonts and things like that came into play. Once we had that one done, it came together really well. And I had worked with the biologists at Ducks Unlimited to find some of the species info, um, species counts, population counts, and things like that for the flyways. And we finished that one around September. And I was thinking, man, what else could we do? I've got like another month before fall. I wonder if there's another type of a print we could do in this same vein. And while we're getting the waterfowl species printed, I could do something else. And so I thought, man, a lot of people are talking about how to age a whitetail on the hoof. I didn't feel like any of them had done it well. Like there's some posters and stuff out there, but they take photos of deer, and it's really hard. It's almost impossible to get the same deer in a pose that shows off all those characteristics. And I thought, man, I could go through and sketch all of the deer in the exact same pose, so you could get an apples to apples comparison of how they would grow and mature. And so I had the idea of laying this print out. I'm a deer dork myself, so like I've read a bunch of books, and I'm in this just as much as anybody. And I wrote the copy, and then I wrote a bunch of information that I thought was pertinent and relevant, and kind of how this all pans out. And from there, I'm my own worst critic. And so I wanted to go to some professionals and say, hey man, I think this is legit. I think it's cool. What do you think as a hunter, as a biologist, all that, and see what you think. So I started working with some people, some buddies of mine, some people in the industry. And then eventually I got connected with Kip Adams and Matt Ross from the NDA, which was QDMA at that time.
Right.
And they loved it, but they had some additional studies that had just come out that like I'd never seen before. And they had some more stats, and they had some more hardcore numbers, things like how many, things like the breeding activity for each age, and stuff like that. So they really helped solidify a lot of the facts and the figures. Cameron kind of rolled the whole thing together into a unique design piece. And then I provided all the art and some of the creative ideas. We actually worked with Boone and Crockett a little bit too, and they provided some stats. So everything on the print is I don't just rely on what I think or, what I'd like to see. I really want to get all the correct facts and figures in there, at least the information we have currently to date. So that's how that whole thing came about, really.
What was the biggest, well, hold on. That's why I absolutely love these things, because it's not just something really cool that's hanging in my house. It's something super informational that I know is accurate. I mean, the NDA doesn't stamp their approval on things if it's putting out, bro science. Like this is scientific. This is accurate. This is all good, true information. And that's what's so cool about it. So, I love taking new hunters. I've actually got a new hunter that just came through and just left. And this is something that I showed him. Like, as we talk about shot placement, I took him into my basement, and here we have this gorgeous piece of functional art that's hanging up, and I could show him, well, look, here's the anatomy of a deer. And not only that, but Ryan goes into, different angles of a deer and where you should shoot them, and how the heart sits in there, And so I literally took him to my wall and said, all right, dude, check this out. This is what we're looking for. This is where we want to shoot and why, because it's all laid out here. and I know that's accurate because it's got the stamp of NDA on it. And so, here we can take a look at this. And so, just something really cool, not only to grab people's attention, but also, informational type stuff. I encourage everybody, I don't care if you've been hunting for 40 years, before the season starts, look at the anatomy of a deer. Like, just look at it and remind yourself where you're shooting and why. So this is a constant in my house, like, really cool, beautiful piece of artwork, but also it teaches me. What was as you worked on this project, let's specifically talk about the growth of the whitetail, growth and maturity. What was the biggest thing that you're like, oh crap, I never knew that? Like, that's cool to know.
I knew a lot of the basics. And when you have to draw these things, you really start to go down rabbit holes. So it's one thing to talk about how a deer's neck swells during the rut. It's another thing to have to accurately draw it, like compared to a 1.5-year-old, to see how that works. So the whole thing was a big learning process for me. And it's just like anything, you might think you know something, and then you really start to research it, and you really start to go down those rabbit holes and pick it apart, put it back together, and you learn how much you don't know about anything. A lot of it, man, was the biggest one. And some of the infographic stuff that I post on social is basically, so people know, it's parts of that print. So it's the art and the type. Either I wrote the type, or it came from a study done by a conservation group or something. So the type and the art is already baked, and then I just repurpose it. You can animate some of that stuff. Instagram Reels makes it easy because you can put cool, music over about anything and make it more cool. But I would say some of the breeding and home range characteristics of young deer was the biggest one to me. A lot of people they know that deer around 4.5, a lot of them will go more nocturnal. They'll limit their daytime movement a lot, where they're harder to kill, they're harder to see in daylight. That's a no-brainer versus a 1.5-year-old who's running willy-nilly all over the place. But like one of the stats that sticks out in my head is that 50 to 75% of the 1.5-year-old deer, they've left their mom. They've been with their mom as fawns that first year, but they've left their mother, and 50 to 75% of them will relocate between 1 mile and 5 miles that following year. So a lot of the deer that you have come in as 1.5-years are new deer. They're setting up their home range. There's a lot of dispersal that goes along there. Another thing is how much they breed. 33%, roughly a third of your does are going to be bred by 1.5-year-old and 2-year-old bucks. And that's in it. All of these numbers come from a healthy, well-managed deer herd. And you think about that, and I always thought in my head, 3, 4, and 5-year-olds did most of the breeding, and those little 1.5-years and 2.5-years just stuck their head down in the food plot and didn't really get any action, but they're breeding a third of your does. Another thing is how little development, how little antler potential those deer have achieved in their first 3 years of life. And they really haven't achieved much potential until they hit 4, 5, and 6. So,
which is why, again, I would highly encourage you. A few weeks ago, we dove in to really how to manage a property with Corey Corson. But we talk a whole lot about, just because a deer at 2.5, doesn't show great tine length. And so you're like, well, should I kill it to get it off the property because it's never going to have great tine length? No, because that deer isn't showing 1/4 of its potential yet. So give it time, let it grow, let it mature, and let it see what it comes out to be. Because that 2.5-year-old deer that doesn't show tine length might blow up to be a 180. I mean, you really have no way of knowing that. But going back to another point that I wanted to make real quick, about your rut activity. That's another thing that I think a lot of people mistake, if you will. is that your young deer, you sit and watch, and on an observation set, or you're sitting in your tree stand, you see rut activity. Those 1.5-year-olds are acting shy almost, and a lot of times it's the same thing you said. You think, maybe they're just not developed yet, and they're not breeding your does, so they're not, you know, really, I think the majority of it is they're shy because they're being pushed around by those 5.5, 6.5-year-old deer, and so they're not just coming out guns blazing chasing does,
Yeah.
but they're catching those does alone and they're breeding the does. But again, that goes back to why we try to kill those 6.5-year-old, 7.5, 8.5-year-old deer. It has nothing to do with their antlers, but you're giving your younger deer more room to breed does by taking out your older, mature bucks that are past their prime.
Well, and the thing that stuck out to me, and I've heard like a lot of guys still buy into cull deer. I think there
Yeah.
may be some science to that. I think Grant Woods had a book, and he talked about high fences a lot. And I didn't understand this at the time until I read his book. But even in high fences, it's really hard to micromanage those genetics.
Oh
And
my gosh,
a
yes.
lot of the high fences are designed to keep inferior genes out, not to keep the deer in.
Right.
And you think about that, that 2.5-year-old that just hasn't expressed much potential. Well, let's, like, for example, I filmed a 1.5-year-old breed of doe under my tree this year in November when I went back to Illinois. And I put that on social media and put some of the stats that I had learned laying out the growth and maturity print. And you think about that. Okay, at 1.5 years old, there's no way to know what his potential is. He's just a little basket rack. There's no way to know what genetics the doe is carrying, and she's got 50% of those genes. So you have no idea what they produced. There's also does can be bred by multiple bucks, so you don't know what kind of genetics are in there. And even then, say the dream scenario happens where your booner breeds the perfect doe, and they make the perfect genetically bred buck. Well, the statistics show that chances are he's leaving the next year. He's leaving your property, and he's going to go 1 to 5 miles away to another property. So, guys want to like shoot an 8-pointer to get those genes out of the herd or whatever. Well, chances are there's a 1.5-year-old carrying 8-point genes that you don't like, and he's sliding in overnight and breeding your does anyway. Chances are the does are carrying some of those genes. Like the gene pool is very muddy for whitetails. Like, it's almost impossible to just say that's my breeder buck on this property. If you're hunting average size free range deer herds like most of us are, it's impossible to even try to go there. So it really goes back to letting a deer mature, letting him express his full potential, and managing for the overall health of the herd. And a lot of guys, they just want to look at the antlers, but man, the health of that doe, the habitat that she's raising fawns in is massively beneficial to growing bigger deer.
Yeah.
So it's one of those. It's one of those things that can get very complicated, and you can go as far down the rabbit hole as you want. But really, managing for high quality habitat and letting deer grow is like always about the best thing you can do.
Yeah, and that's that's essentially exactly what me and Corey alluded to. You watch all these studies and you hear all these. Well, down in Texas, they had a 100,000-acre ranch, and there's so much that plays into that. Habitat, protein sources, water sources, how much moisture is there, how much energy they have to expend to get the protein that they're getting. I mean, there's so much things that go into this. And on the studies that say, yes, we believe culling deer works, because in 10 years we took an average of 120-inch buck herd to 140-inch buck herd. Again, are they growing 20 inches in 10 years because you're culling out the smaller deer, or because you've started pumping $60,000 worth of protein into them? Where's the growth? Where's the growth coming from? I mean, there's so many things that come into that. But yeah, I do believe that, like you said, it all comes down to waiting for a buck to reach maturity of that 7.5, 8.5. And again, that's different depending on where you're at, but, waiting for that buck to reach its maturity and then harvesting it, letting it live its life, and then harvesting it will produce bigger and better bucks.
Yep. Well,
Now, what is it?
we talked a little bit. I was talking with a buddy about how like the maturity has been pushed back a lot. At first it was like everybody was just trying to get him 3.5, like that was the magic number.
Yeah.
And
It's just because nobody was patient.
yeah, and really over the past few years, I think people have seen it pay off, and we're kind of in the golden age of deer management, I feel like. And now guys are waiting until 5.5 and 6.5 and stuff like that. So, and I think NDA has kicked out some numbers. The average age of a deer that's harvested is getting older too, like across states and across the country, not just within little pockets of hunting clubs and stuff like that.
Right. No, you're absolutely correct. And again, that's what you have to understand is like my deer are not going to reach the same age potential as a deer in North Carolina. And the deer in North Carolina are not going to reach the same age potential as the deer in, Nevada. I mean, they're going to be completely different. And we have to understand that, like, and expect that, it's not one size fits all when it comes to deer. And it's the same as genetically, you look at people from across the world. I mean, people are different size, shapes, body weights. And I'm not even going to try to get into this, but I mean, if you look at average height and weight for Iceland, it's going to be different than average height and weight for the United States of America. Yeah. Same with China and Japan and Russia. It's going to be different. The same is true with your deer. Deer are going to grow different parts of the world, and we have to understand that. But there is an overlying umbrella. What is that? I'm trying to get back to your picture quick. At the top of the picture, there's a heat map put out by Boone and Crockett.
Yep.
And that shows that, what is it, 5.5?
Yep, 5.5 is the average age of a booner. And
gotcha.
I don't know. When I was working with Kip and Matt, they were saying that typically a buck has reached 95 to 100% of his potential at 5.5 and 6.5. I don't know whether that 5.5 is the peak that produces a booner, or that's it was just a big deer and somebody killed it at 5.5. If those booners would, you know what I'm saying? I don't know for a fact, and I'm not sure if anybody knows whether or not they would have gotten bigger at 6.5, or just that's when most of those big deer get shot in the Boone and Crockett books. You see what I'm saying? I'm not sure if those Boone and Crockett potential deer top out at 5.5, or that's just when they got shot. But yeah, they said 5.5 is the average. And
that's what, you think about it. I mean, there's people that's killed a booner that was 3.5 years old.
Yeah.
And, had they shot that deer at 3.5, it was a 180-inch buck. And then had they shot it at 5.5, it would have been a 210-inch buck. I mean, you never know that. But on average, nationally, Boone and Crockett's 5.5-year-old deer. So that gives you a good line in the sand of, if we want to look at a national average, if we want to look at, where bucks reach their potential. And again, if we want bucks to get past their potential before we start harvesting them, they're on the downhill side at 6.5, 7.5, 8.5. That deer that I just shot in Oklahoma, he was 7.5 years old. 7.5 years old plus, could have been 8.5. It didn't have a tooth left in his head. Big bully of a deer, treating all the 3.5, 2.5-year-olds deer, pushing them off. And that's the definition of a deer that needs to be shot in order to grow a bigger and better herd, because you have a 7.5-plus-year-old deer taking away protein, taking away habitat, taking away does, away from your healthy 4.5s that you want to grow to be bigger and better. And so that's what it all comes down to.
Yeah, those bully deer, man, I'm always a fan of shooting them, and coyotes.
Yeah, they're awesome. What's the biggest, that number one, as you did this study?
Yeah.
What was that number one thing that stood out to you as far as, if guys will learn this, then they'll be able to best identify a deer's age on the hoof. Not, I mean, I understand if we look at every single factor,
Yep.
that would be the very best way. But what's the easiest? Like, if you look at their sway of their back or their drop of their belly or their tarsal glands or what stood out to you as the easiest way to identify a deer's age?
Man, to me, I feel like it's the sway of the back, the round rump, and the stained tarsal. There's a lot. It is sometimes hard deer to deer, and it's hard.
Very much so.
When those deer swell during the rut. For example, I literally just looked at a trail cam picture earlier today. A place on my farm in Illinois, deer's probably upper 140s, maybe 100%. He's 3.5 when I look at him in October. And I literally just looked at a picture the other day in mid-November, and it's like, dang, he's at least 4,
Yeah.
So, and when we did the print, I designed it to be a comparison from age to age of like a single deer specifically. So, for example, when you look at the print, if you go to that 5.5-year-old, well, that 5.5-year-old in South Carolina is not going to look the same as the 5.5-year-old in Wisconsin. We know that he's going to be bigger, all that kind of stuff. But comparatively, that South Carolina deer should still have some belly sway, some rounded rump, stained tarsals, all that kind of stuff. And if you compare that to a 2.5-year-old in South Carolina, you should see those same comparisons. Now, everything in the north is just going to be bigger, right? But a lot of guys talk about the where the neck meets the brisket. And to me, that is a hard one because you have to have the perfect apples to apples. That deer has to be standing level, not mid stride, none of that kind of stuff.
Head can't be turned.
It can be turned. It can be bristled up. You really need a good, solid photo of that to compare that and measure that. For me, the back sway, the rounded rump, and the stained tarsals. And the stained tarsals is something I didn't really pay a whole lot of attention to until I started working and getting, bouncing ideas off of some of those guys. And if you look at the print, one of the reasons that I sketched those deer in that exact position is to show off all of those attributes. So, for example, one leg is kicked back where you can see the tarsal gland on every deer. The head is looking out so that you can see how the width of that neck compares to the skull. The deer are all broadside, so you can see where the neck comes into that brisket. You can see the rounding of the rump. And once you really start to look, I've noticed this, and I am absolutely not an expert or the world's greatest bow hunter, not even close. But I've started to notice some things when you start to look at these things collectively, you start to pick them up on a deer. Like, I just 3.5. He's got a little bit angled rump. Those tarsals aren't stained. You tend to. It's like anything. The more you pay attention to it, the better you tend to get at it. You can almost look, and it's like, I don't quite know how I can tell, but all of these things are like calculating in my mind behind the scenes, and you can just kind of look and tell. But again, man, the only real way that I know to do it 100% is to just keep track of the deer year to year on your farm. There's a buck on our place, on my parents' place in Illinois. 2 years ago, I killed a big deer, a Boone and Crockett deer. And then I was trying to shoot a doe afterwards. And I was hunting on the edge of a bean field, and this buck came out, and you could just tell he was 2.5. Like, everything about him just said 2.5. And he just had that little, 2.5-year-old frame. But man, he had a couple splits on his brow tines and had a little bit of mass, and he sit kind of high. And I was looking at him through my binoculars at 30 yards, just looking at all of his rack and everything. I was like, man, he's going to be a stud. And then I noticed he was missing half his left ear, and the fur kind of rolled around, and it produced like a cotton ball on the end of his ear. So he's got half of an ear, and it's white on the end of it. And I was like, man, that's going to be cool to watch that deer grow up, because there is no mistaking this deer at all. And
Yeah,
I've been able to watch him year to year at 3.5, at 4.5, and I've been able to shoot him every year. And it's going to be cool. I can't wait to see what he turns into next year at five and a
it's
half.
cool.
But a deer like that, of course, you can peg him every time.
And you're gonna shoot him at 5.5. That's what's gonna happen.
I mean, I really thought he'd
How
be
big
bigger
you
than
think
he
he is
was at
now?
4.5. But he honestly, I feel like he's the exact same size rack inch wise as
Really?
he was at 3.5.
And that just goes back to show, like, that just because you see a deer at 3.5 and you're like, holy crap, he's got everything to be a big deer,
Yep.
doesn't mean he's gonna be.
Yeah.
And the whole idea, dude, I've heard Matt Ross himself say, I've seen Forkies grow up to be 180s.
Yeah.
I've seen it. You have to let deer reach maturity. Before we move on, I gotta give a shout out to my friends over at boning. I love building arrows. That's where my artistic nature comes in, is building arrows. I love it. I go out to my garage, to my bow shop area, and I just build arrows. That's what I do for fun. That's what I do to relax. Boning has all the tools you need to build your own arrows, as well as all the components to build your own arrows. Most everybody is familiar with the Blazer vane, most sold vane in archery. However, they've got vanes and wraps for everything. No matter what you're shooting, indoor, 3D, hunting, they've got vanes for everything. I am a personal huge fan of a 4-fletch with a 3-inch Bronco. I would highly encourage you to check out Boning. They also have some really cool Fredbear branded products with their Fredbear camo wraps and Fredbear flannel wraps. So go check out Boning. What was the information you found out surrounding the head when looking at, now that's something that's hard for hunters, because the moment they look at the head, they look at the antlers. And you cannot judge the age of a deer off antlers, no matter what anybody tells you. That's just a myth. Anyways.
Yeah.
So what'd you learn about the head when you're looking at the head of an animal, how to judge off the head?
Well, the forehead is going to be darker on a mature deer. They're going to start to exhibit that Roman nose that they talk about a lot. They're going to be a little bit more gray. One of the big things too is they're going to the width of the neck on a big mature deer during the rut is going to be wider than the frame of the head. Whereas, 1.5-year-old deer is going to be slender, going to look like a doe with antlers. But overall, they're just going to be bigger, more filled out. A lot of times they get darker, So yeah, there's a lot of differences in the head. The bases typically are going to be bigger. So the basal circumference of the antlers is going to grow, whether or not the overall rack size gets that much bigger. They're going to get more heavier. They're going to get heavier. They're going to get more massive. So there's quite a few things. I also think too, I've noticed a lot of deer from year to year. There are characteristics that are in the head that can help you identify deer from year to year too. They may be blind in one eye. That happens a lot. I've seen a lot of deer with a notch out of their ear. So the head and neck area can also carry some physical characteristics that can help you spot a deer year to year and help identify them.
If a deer doesn't have something just absolutely blatant, like the ear you were just talking about, how do you, that's a question I get a lot. It's like, Dylan, how do you know that's the same deer? Like, how do you even know? How do you judge, or not judge? How do you identify a deer year to year?
Yeah, I've once I started working with Kip and Matt, I've really followed them and followed their careers and listened to those guys. The guys from the MSU Deer Lab, I follow a lot and listen. I'm more of a deer dork than probably anybody you ever meet. Unless you're that way, you might be more. I don't know. But
man, I would like to say I am, but I'm not.
Yeah. Well, I have to study a lot of it for my career anyway, and you end up picking up on stuff like that. But they were on an Onyx app, like a Q&A, like a seminar on how to age deer. And so I watched that, and I asked in the comments afterwards, I was like, is there any, characteristics that will go from year to year? And Kip said that the overall shape of the rack is the biggest thing. deer are going to add more mass. They're gonna add some points and maybe some kickers
and
here and there. But overall, like if you have a rack that sits high and tight, he's always going to be high and tight. He's never going to go wide the next year. The way the beams on a buck kick up, a lot of times you see that in a deer, and really those deer score really well if the beams come out and then kick up at the end. Usually get a couple.
Kind of like that one behind you.
Yeah, like him. So like this deer here, he might he's probably going to add a tine or two. You know, he was a 9 trying to be a 10 really hard. So like he may go from an 8 to a 9 to a 10. But the overall shape of his rack is going to stay the same.
Right.
And the brow tines too. I've always heard that. I've seen that quite a bit. If a buck just has really great brow tines or really crap brow tines, they're probably always going to be that way. But they say,
I've got a property
shape of the rack.
I've got a property here in Kansas, and I've hunted it now for 4 years, and I've never seen a buck with good brow tines ever.
Really?
And that just goes to show. I mean, the bucks that are in there, you know, obviously those genetics have been around long enough to weed out the other genetics of good brow tines. Now, before you get in the comment section and start saying, well, Dylan, last episode you talked about excursion bucks and how I understand all that, but I'm just telling you, the deer that are on this property just don't have good brow genetics. Now I'm not saying that, you know, an excursion buck's not going to come on from a property next door and just have crazy brow tines. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying the genetics on this property haven't held good brow tines. And I honestly didn't know that. I didn't know that. I never put the two together that once they have bad brow tines, they're just going to have bad brow tines.
Yeah. Well, that may be a region wide thing. You know, it's probably not just on your property. It's probably going to be several properties in that whole area.
Right. Yeah.
But the deer. So 2 years ago, I killed a really big deer, and we had pictures of him in early December. And he moved in on my parents' place on early December. He's probably 170-inch deer, and he stayed on us all through the winter. He dropped his antlers like late March. And then the following year, we didn't have a single picture of him. And I ended up killing him on November 4th. And he went 203 5/8 gross, and he was 195 1/8 net. But he put on like 30 inches. And I sent his teeth off to get the cementum measured, you know, where you can send them off to the lab. And they said he was 6.5. So between 5.5 and 6.5, he put on 30 inches of antler. And if you look at his shed compared to his final rack, you'd think there's no way that's the same deer. But then, and I thought the same thing. But then you start looking at it, and it's like, man, there's a flat spot on his G2, and rarely, you know. Usually antlers are like a cylinder. Well, this guy had a flat spot there, and then the shape of his rack, and he had a kicker coming off the inside of the beam. And you look, and the shape of the rack is identical. He grew some trash. He put on a ton of mass. He put on inches everywhere. But the overall shape, the way the tines come off the beams, the way the beams wrap around, all that kind of stuff. So
that's cool.
Yeah, they were saying that the overall shape of the rack is the biggest one.
Yeah.
I feel like that's hard in a place like North Carolina that's just covered in 120-inch 8-pointers.
Do you have any bears where you hunt in North Carolina?
Yeah, I've seen a lot more since we've moved here. We've been here about 10 years, and I feel like there's more now. We have black bears. You know, guys hunt them with dogs. We've had one run across our property one time. Like physically seen a bear, I've probably only seen 3 or 4.
Really? See, I've got a slight bear hunting addiction. Like, I love bear hunting. I just become obsessed with it, and I've been trying to talk my wife into a North Carolina vacation. I'm like, dude, you go on the lighthouse tours, you go to the beach, I'll be bear hunting. Like, it's a win-win for everybody, and I haven't got her to buy into that yet. But I'm like, come on, you're all about Nicholas Sparks and lighthouses, and you can go do your thing, and I'll be shooting bears. Like,
well, you need to go to the coast because that's where they're at. You know that already, I'm sure.
Yeah, she'll be like I said. We can stay in the same hotel. She'll go out and look at lighthouses. I'll go out and find bears and kill them.
I've got
I
some
did
buddies
that.
in Wilmington, and they kill some big bears down there.
I actually got her to buy into that very thought for Maine. I'm like, you've always wanted to go to Maine and do the lighthouse tours. So like, let's drive up and we'll do the lighthouse tours and then we'll go bear hunting. And so that was by far the best vacation ever because she got to do her thing and then I got to go kill a big old bear. So
That's awesome, dude.
that's how it goes, man. But what's your
Win-win.
number one? Go ahead.
That's one of the reasons that we bought some property in Hancock County where my parents are, so we can take the kids back and pawn them off on the grandparents and have a little bit of vacation. Then I can deer hunt stands and stuff.
There you go. I asked all of my guests, what's a hunting 101 tip you've got for us? Fred Bear was big on his field notes. So I like to ask my guests, what's one thing that I can take and make myself a better hunter with? So as far as aging deer, deciding if it's a mature deer, deciding if you should shoot it or not, what's your tip on judging whitetails?
Well, this is totally personal experience. It has nothing to do with art or anything, but
that's what I like.
If you have any question, don't shoot it. Because
there you go.
If I've ever seen a deer and I'm thinking, I don't know, is he man, I think he's and I've killed a couple big deer now, so my thoughts are different on this. But like earlier, just a few years ago, I was like, hey man, if a 140-inch 8-pointer comes out, I'm whacking it. That's happening.
Dead.
So I'm like, is he a 140? I don't know. Man, don't let this one walk. If you're doing that at all, just don't shoot. Because if your goal is to try to shoot something bigger than that, you've got to get to the no questions asked. Like, oh yeah, I'm shooting him. Those are the ones that you don't want to hesitate. If you're trying to talk a deer into being bigger than he is, you're gonna regret it. And I don't think you should regret shooting a deer. I don't want to be that guy at all. If it makes you happy, awesome.
Yeah.
I've got a 6-year-old boy, and we are about to wear out some spikes, man. When he goes hunting, and we'll get there eventually. But so it depends on what you're looking for and where you're at. But if you are trying to shoot a certain caliber of deer and you are trying to talk yourself into shooting that deer or that he's big enough, just don't do it because it's not going to.
Absolutely. Or if you send a picture to your wife and she's like, seriously, you're going to shoot that little dink? That's a good indication too. I've done that.
Is that personal experience?
100% it is. Yeah, definitely it is. Definitely it is. And I said, well, I mean, he's getting me a little fired up. So I need you to talk me off the ledge. She said, don't the first week of season, don't shoot it. And I'm like, okay, you're right. I've got two. I came into this with the idea of optics, binoculars.
Yeah.
If you really want to be able to better judge a deer and decide, should I shoot this deer or not? When he's 20 yards away is not the time to decide. Because usually what I find is when I wait till he's at 20 yards, I'm like, dude, he's a stinking buck. Let's kill him. And I shoot him. But if I have a good set of binoculars with me and I'm looking at him when he's 200 yards away and I've got the 20 minutes to decide if I want to shoot him or not, then by the time he gets there, I've already decided and the temptation's not there and I make smarter decisions. So invest in a good set of binoculars. I'm a huge fan of Kowa optics. I understand they're a little pricey for some people, but they're phenomenal Japanese glass. So I choose to go with that because I like to look at every detail of every antler that I can. But invest in a good set of binoculars and look at that deer 200 yards away. I don't mean to sound graphic here, but I tell my daughter, if you wait until you're in the back of the car with the guy to make sure your morals are there, they're not going to be there. Yep. You have to know far in advance what you're going to do and how you're going to handle yourself. The same is true with deer. And I know that's a stretch, but the same is true with deer. If I'm watching that deer from 200 yards and I'm looking at every piece of his antler and I'm looking at the sway of his belly and his back and how his head turns and I'm looking at his tarsal glands, I'm looking at the patch on his forehead. If I'm looking at all those things 200 yards away, I've already made my decision. And then when he gets there, I'm like, he's 3.5. I need to pass him. But if I wait till he's there and I look at him, I'm like, oh, dude, he's got horns. Let's kill him. That's me. Like, seriously, dude, I get fired up and I shoot him. So have a good set of binoculars. Now, my life tip is this. I applaud Ryan for this, but whatever you like to do, add value to that industry. Ryan is a passionate bow hunter, and he has added value to the bow hunting community by giving them informational stuff that they can hang in their house and it be beautiful and be proud of and catch the attention of people. And now non-hunters can come in and they'll look at this as art, and I can, then I can make the transition into hunting. And, we're not just savage animals. We care about the animals, and look how much we care about. I mean, so add value to the industry that you're a part of. And truly, I applaud Ryan for doing that, because he's taken his passion and he's added value to it. And so, Ryan,
I
from the
appreciate
bottom
that.
of my heart, man, really, good job.
I appreciate that. And, one of the things that I feel like I've got the unique role of is like contributing to the atmosphere of hunt camp. And to your point, I really do want to take, like, my dad was a farmer and my mom was a postmaster. Like, it doesn't run in my family. It really is a God given gift. And I don't take that lightly. And I feel like I really do want to contribute to the atmosphere of hunting and bow hunting and all that that's given to me. I really would like to give back to that overall.
That's awesome, man. Where can they find you at?
Instagram is where I'm most active currently. It's at Ryan Kirby Art, and then ryankirby.com is my website.
Guys, go check him out. I promise you, you won't be disappointed. I literally went to Hobby Lobby, which as an artist, you're probably like, crap, dude, you bought a piece of crap frame for my art. What are you gonna do?
Yeah.
But I literally ran to Hobby Lobby because I was so fired up about how cool these things are, which I still need to send you some pictures of them hanging in my basement.
Yeah,
But guys, go check them out. But I do have to give a shout out to my guys over at Minus 33 Merino Wool. No matter where you hunt, we've talked a lot about different areas. Minus 33 and Merino Wool is a fantastic thing to have. I am a huge fan of Merino. I wear it in the mountains. I wear it in the whitetail woods. I wear it daily on my feet and in my underwear. I love Merino, and Minus 33 just does it really, really well. So I'd highly encourage you, if you're in the market for base layers or Merino, or you've just never even tried Merino, I would highly encourage you to try Minus 33. It's a very high quality Merino and sourced right here in the United States of America. I absolutely love it. Go check out Minus 33 Merino Wool. But guys, thanks for listening. Y'all have a great week and a very, very, very happy new year from myself and from everybody at Bear Archery.